So this is just a few minutes when we explore some of the questions that have come up during the making of this course. We're going to start by thinking about, why did we make this?
The reason we wanted to make this course is to share more of our experience with people out there, some of the lessons that we've learned, the obstacles that we've come up against, and share more of the stories that we've learned as we've gone along.
Yeah, and for me, it's like I come out of a technology background, and we all do, right? And as we went through this, we started out talking about how to use technology to go faster. But what we've realized over the course of the last 3 years, basically, it's not about technology. What is preventing people from moving faster is the way they view business and the management processes and practices that are in place, particularly in larger organizations, that we just, as technologists, just can't control. So, trying to reach a broader audience.
Yeah, and I think for me it was the same thing that led me to write the Lean Enterprise book. Having written continuous delivery and seen that the technology problems weren't the obstacle, it was the people problems. And I think all of us have been helping organizations with transformations for a few years now, and hopefully some of those experiences and lessons learned have gone into this.
So one of the main obstacles I think we've all come up against is, the aversion humans have to uncertainty. Daniel Kahneman has a great discussion that says, people, first of all, they want to be right, then they'll be wrong, but the thing they'll worst be is uncertain. And often what we find when we talk to a lot of people leading these initiatives is they want certainty of, show me the plan of all the different steps you're going to take as you go on this transformation. Show me the one-page diagram that means we're going to be successful. Yeah. And they know this is wrong, but they'd rather be wrong than uncertain. So this is one of the things we've really tried to tackle in this course, is get people comfortable that there is no one way, that you need to work your way to a solution by problem solving. And it's important that you leverage all the skills in the company to do that.
Yeah, we see all the time companies fail to leverage the innovation of their people. You've got the people who are doing the transformation and they're acting on the rest of the organization rather than helping the rest of the organization problem solve. There's a great quote by Beate Bogsnes. He says, you can't end command and control through command and control. Transform yourself. It doesn't work, but we see that all the time. It's kind of depressing. And I think it's not just that people need to problem solve, it's that's the only way to actually learn. You can't take someone else's blueprint and just copy it and expect to get the same results. It's only by making mistakes yourself that you learn.
And I come in and talk to clients and they say, well, Joanne, tell me how they did this for security, risk and compliance in another organization. So I tell them a story. And it's like, well, that doesn't apply to us. Tell us another story. Tell us something that's specific to us. And I go, really? You have to figure this out yourself. And I can give you a process, but all you'll end up doing is following that process without getting the value, and better outcomes for your organization. It's just people reorganize yourself. Now work this way, without really thinking about why you'd want to work that way.
So we present a number of tools in this course. One of the themes I think that we've seen as we've been going through the course is it's not just the tools, it's about what the tools enables. Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, one of my favorite questions when we're working with senior leaders is, if I ask them how much technology innovation is happening in their company, they will list off NoSQL databases, AI, VI, you think of a word, they can do it. But when we ask them how much management innovation is happening, well, we don't hear anything. They're still using these large, big annual budgeting processes or annual review processes, where really when we're dealing in this new complex environment, you need to be focused on smaller, faster feedback loops at all levels, whether that's your budgeting process, whether it's your growth and development for your people, whether it's the products you're trying to build or the processes that you're trying to improve. So creating safety, allowing this treatment of error, this inertia that we often see as another big blocker, to be addressed through safe to fail experiments.
Yeah, nobody wants to experiment. And it's, the other thing I find is that they don't want to have the discipline, or they feel they don't have the discipline to actually do the right thing consistently. I'll try it, and then I slip back to the way it was before, because it's just too hard to change everybody's behavior. Right.
Yeah, it requires a great deal of persistence at all different levels, I think, at senior leadership levels, at the management level, the level of the people doing the work. I think all those things have to be in place, and it's very difficult to have a lasting effect if you don't have that. I mean, there's kind of guerrilla change where people do things, but then what happens is they get found out and they get stomped on by someone else. So trying to make sure that you have that support from all levels of the leadership in place is really important. I think that's one of our goals, is to help provide some guidance to people at all different levels of the organisation on how you do this.
Yeah. I'm really interested, Jez, in hearing your story about when you worked for the government and you had to, you're working on a project that actually had a great deal of compliance and regulations, and what you did to get through that, because I think it's a really good story. When I talk to technologists and say, what are the problems that you're encountering? Two things always come to the top of the list. One is compliance and security, and the other is provisioning of environments so I can do my work.
Yeah, and as you say, I was working for the last year in the US federal government for a team called 18F, which is part of the General Services Administration. And we had this problem where once you have a system ready to go live, it takes about 6 to 9 months to go through the compliance process. You have to document all the controls that you've put in place. For even a moderate impact government information system, you have to document 350 controls. And then you have to test all those controls and document how you tested those controls. That process of just documentation of those controls and testing them takes 6 to 9 months before you can then go live. This is all documented in NIST's special publication 853. So we wanted to change that. We wanted to be able to go live much more quickly. So what we ended up building is a platform as a service. So we used Amazon Web Services, and there's a special GovCloud region of Amazon Web Services just for government federal information systems. Of course. And then on top of that, we built a platform as a service on Cloud Foundry, and we called it cloud.gov. And you can actually go to cloud.gov, and you can go to GitHub and download the source code. It's all open source. The documentation, the compliance documentation is all open source. It's at compliance.cloud.gov. And we basically implemented a lot of those controls at the infrastructure and platform layer. So now, if you want to deploy a new government information system, you can deploy it on cloud.gov, and you only have to document between 15 and 40 controls. That's much, much easier. You can do that in days or weeks rather than months. So by actually implementing compliance at the platform and infrastructure layer, we completely turned that around. And we have, the armed forces, the US Armed Forces using this. It's very, very powerful. One of the reasons that I went into the government is so that we could say, listen, we're doing this in the federal government. What's your excuse? I've never worked in a more compliance-heavy environment than the US federal government, and yet we were able to implement these practices and principles. So
I think what I really like about the story, and resonates with this course, is that the initiative and the work comes from people who are actually responsible for doing the work and the outcome. So it isn't the security team or the compliance team saying, you have to do it this way. It was you taking the initiative as a team to say, we want to do this, how do we get there? And a lot of discipline to actually stay on course and measure your targets and keep working that way.
Yeah, I mean, it was a small team of about 10 to 15 people, and we worked very closely with the compliance people in the information security team at the GSA. It was very collaborative and experimental.
So the great last elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about, that we constantly hear is holding us back, is the rewards and recognition of people in organizations. So what are the real incentives to change? And we've all spent times in lots of organizations together and individually talking to the people in the organization, but it really comes down to the question or the answer that no one wants to talk about. How are we going to change our incentive structures to enable these changes to happen? So what kind of experience or examples or advice do you have for how we can try to address that?
I firmly believe it won't happen until we actually change our management schools. Because it just fosters bad behavior, It's short-term thinking, rewards based on shareholder price within a quarter. Well, what are you going to think of a long-term range if that's your reward system basis? No, And it's the executives who are actually rewarded that way. The people doing the work, they don't have any fingers in that pie at all. right?
But you had a nice story from WestJet, right?
Oh yeah, the WestJet story is really good, where you actually not only share the profits with all employees, but you also, as an employee, were able to invest up to 20% of your gross income into shares. And WestJet would match that dollar for dollar. So I was essentially doubling my money by doing investment into the company. But also, I became a shareholder of the company, right? So now I've got double fingers in that pie. And that is a really strong incentive to get people to start collaborating and thinking about end-to-end processes to say, how could we do this better? How could we compete against our competitors instead of compete against ourselves internally?
I think the biggest problem is, a lot of these incentives are not system level incentives. They're function or team level incentives. Any incentives that you put in place, it's got to be to create the system level outcomes, because that's what's going to encourage people to collaborate. Any incentive that rewards just one particular group, the classic one is developers being rewarded for throughput and operations being rewarded for stability. Well, no, we actually need to have both of those behaviors. One of the things we looked at in the State of DevOps report was a measure of IT performance, which captures both throughput and stability. And what we found is the high performers were doing better at both of those things. You've got to think about system level metrics that reward collaboration and people working together to achieve those system level outcomes.
Yeah, I think one of the perverse things we've seen with a lot of incentives on these programs is often when they're the senior executives in the company, they've got $1 million bonuses delivered and measured on certain outputs that they need to achieve, certain revenue figures. Joanne and I were actually with a large bank only recently where the whole strategy team sat down together and openly admitted that one of the challenges that they were having is that they were all competing against one another based on different measures of success. They were actually optimized to undercut one another rather than collaborate and work together to achieve a system level outcome for the bank. We've often worked in other organizations where, founder-led companies where they felt that they were getting slow with delivery, so they needed to create internal competition within the different parts of the organization, trying to create all these autonomous different teams, because that's how we hear all these organizations work. But we're going to compete them against one another. We're going to measure them against one another. We're going to set incentives so they actually stop collaborating, where they're all just focused about getting their work out and live into the market, but not working together. And again, these have perverse effects for what you're actually trying to achieve and often hold the company back. So if you're serious about trying to take on this change, yes, you need to look at the technology aspects. It's important. But also understand the management aspects around rewards and recognition for people, make them transparent, focus them on company level outcomes, give your employees an opportunity to have a stake in that company outcome by giving them some shares and some of the payback for all the efforts they put in. These are some of the things that we see work really well, and hopefully you can try to start to adopt these and address that big question that nobody really wants to answer, is how are we going to change the rewards and recognition to make this work?
So finally, thanks very much for taking this course. We hope you find it valuable. We wish you the best of luck with your journey. And please send us your feedback. We love to hear how you've used this, what's worked, what hasn't worked. Please talk about it, blog about it, and send us your feedback. The email will be on the course website.